For nearly 2,000 years, humanity has lived under the shadow of its own predictions about the end of the world. Every generation, without exception, has looked at its wars, its crises, its upheavals, and concluded with certainty, this is it. From the scoot of empires to global pandemics, from world wars to nuclear standoffs, each era has believed itself to be standing at the threshold of final judgment. Yet history has consistently delivered the same verdict. Those predictions were wrong. Time moved forward. Civilizations adapted. The anticipated Nihaya never arrived. This long record of failed expectations has shaped a deep skepticism around apocalyptic claims, reducing them, in many minds, to exaggerations or symbolic religious language rather than concrete future realities. However, the present moment introduces a critical shift in that historical pattern. What distinguishes our era from all previous ones is not merely the intensity of global crises, but the emergence of conditions that were previously impossible. For the first time in human history, the technological, geopolitical, and environmental infrastructure exists that could, at least theoretically, fulfill specific prophetic descriptions in a literal sense. Earlier generations may have had access to the same texts, Revelation, Isaiah, Jeremiah, but they lacked the material framework required to actualize those visions. They could imagine, but they could not implement. Today, that limitation no longer exists. We now inhabit a world defined by advanced engineering, global connectivity, ecological instability, and unprecedented military capacity. This convergence forms the foundation of a new argument, that certain prophecies may no longer be confined to metaphor, but could be unfolding as tangible events within observable reality. This shift becomes particularly evident when examining the first prophecy, the drying up of the Euphrates River. The biblical foundation for this claim is drawn from multiple sources across both the Old and New Testaments. In Revelation 16:12, the sixth angel pours out his bowl upon the great river Euphrates, causing its waters to dry up in preparation for the kings from the east. This is reinforced in Revelation 9, where 4 angels are described as being bound at the Euphrates, held in restraint until a precisely appointed moment. These passages are not isolated, they are echoed centuries earlier in Isaiah 11, where the Lord is described as striking a mighty river into multiple streams, and in Jeremiah 50, where a drought is pronounced upon Babylon's waters as part of divine judgment. Across these texts, the Euphrates is not incidental, it is central, repeatedly identified as a geographical and symbolic focal point. Traditionally, such passages have been interpreted symbolically. The drying of a great river was understood as a metaphor for the scoot of power, the removal of stability, or the execution of divine judgment against nations. Within this framework, the Euphrates represented more than water. It signified the lifeblood of civilizations, particularly Babylon, and its depletion symbolized the collapse of human systems under divine authority. This interpretive approach dominated theological discourse for centuries, largely because a literal reading seemed implausible. A river of such magnitude, with its historical continuity stretching back thousands of years, was not expected to simply disappear within a human timeframe. Yet the modern context challenges that assumption. Increasingly, the Euphrates is not being discussed in purely symbolic terms, but as a physical entity undergoing measurable decline. Contemporary environmental data and regional reports indicate that the river is indeed shrinking. Several factors contribute to this alwaka. Upstream dam construction, particularly in Turkey, has significantly reduced water flow into downstream regions such as Syria and Iraq. Large-scale hydroengineering projects have altered the natural distribution of water, prioritizing national resource control over ecological continuity. In parallel, prolonged drought conditions, exacerbated by climate change, have further diminished water levels. Rising temperatures, reduced rainfall, and increased evaporation rates have accelerated the process. Additionally, industrial and agricultural overuse has strained the river beyond sustainable limits. The result is a transformation that would have been unimaginable in earlier centuries. Sections of the Euphrates that once supported thriving communities are now visibly receding. Riverbeds are exposed. Agricultural lands are turning to dust. Entire villages that depended on its waters are being abandoned. What was once a symbol of life and continuity is increasingly becoming a site of absence and al-azma. From a purely empirical standpoint, the river is not yet completely dry, but the al-ittijah is unmistakable. It is diminishing in both volume and influence, raising the possibility that a full or near total depletion could occur within a historically short time frame. This development carries implications that extend beyond environmental concern. Within the prophetic framework, the Euphrates is not merely a river, it is described as a barrier. Its presence serves a restraining function, holding back forces that are not yet permitted to advance. If that barrier weakens or disappears, the text suggests a consequential shift, the preparation of a pathway for the kings of the East. Traditionally interpreted as powerful Eastern nations or coalitions, this phrase introduces a geopolitical dimension. The geography of the Euphrates has long been associated with strategic corridors linking Asia to the Middle East. As water levels decline, previously inaccessible routes could become traversable, both literally and logistically. In this sense, the drying of the river is not presented as an isolated phenomenon, but as a preparatory event. It signals the removal of an obstacle, the opening of a pathway, and the potential realignment of military or political forces on a large scale. Whether one interprets this in strictly literal terms or as a convergence of symbolic and physical realities, the pattern is clear. A historically stable element is undergoing rapid change, and that change aligns, at least structurally, with ancient descriptions. Taken together, these observations reinforce the central thesis established at the beginning. The difference between past and present is not simply a matter of belief, but of capability. Where earlier generations saw metaphor due to limitation, the current generation confronts the possibility of literal fulfillment due to unprecedented conditions. The Euphrates, once assumed to be an unchanging constant, is now demonstrably vulnerable. Its decline serves as both a physical event and a conceptual trigger, inviting a re-evaluation of how ancient texts are understood in a modern context. Whether one accepts the prophetic interpretation or not, the convergence between text and al-Waqa is increasingly difficult to ignore. Building upon the first prophecy, where a physical geography once assumed to be permanent is now visibly changing, we encounter a second prophecy that shifts the focus from environment to visibility, from landscape to perception. If the drying of the Euphrates raises questions about physical feasibility, the account of the two witnesses in Revelation 11 challenges something equally fundamental: the possibility of global, simultaneous observation. Here, the issue is not whether an event can occur, but whether it can be witnessed by the entire world at once. The biblical foundation for this prophecy is primarily located in Revelation 11, where two figures are introduced as divinely appointed witnesses. They are described as prophesying for 1,260 days, endowed with extraordinary authority, the power to shut the sky, to prevent rain, to turn water into blood, and to strike the earth with plagues. Their role is not passive, it is confrontational, standing in opposition to the prevailing al-Quwa of their time. This imagery is not isolated within the New Testament. It draws heavily from earlier scriptural traditions. In Zechariah 4, the prophet describes a vision of two olive trees standing beside a golden lampstand, identified as the two anointed ones who stand by the Lord of the whole earth. This establishes a symbolic continuity, the idea of two divinely sanctioned agents operating within a larger redemptive framework. Further back still, Deuteronomy 19 provides a legal foundation, stating that no matter of judgment can be established on the testimony of a single witness. Two are required. Thus, the appearance of two witnesses in Revelation is not arbitrary. It is rooted in both prophetic symbolism and legal precedent, forming a coherent thread across centuries of biblical thought. Yet the most controversial element of this prophecy does not lie in the identity or power of the witnesses, but in the reaction to their deaths. Revelation 11:9 describes a moment when, after being killed, their bodies lie in the streets, and people from every tribe and language and nation will gaze on their bodies for 3.5 days. This single statement has historically presented a significant interpretive challenge. For most of human history, the idea that the entire world could simultaneously observe a single localized event was not merely unlikely, it was impossible. Communication was bound by physical limitations, distance, time, and infrastructure. News traveled slowly, often distorted, and never reached all populations at once. Even as communication technologies advanced through writing systems, printing presses, and early broadcasting, the notion of real-time global synchronization remained out of reach. As a result, many scholars approached this passage metaphorically. The world was interpreted as a representative audience rather than a literal global population. Others suggested that the text employed hyperbolic language common in apocalyptic literature. These interpretations were not necessarily dismissive, they were constrained by the technological realities of their time. Without a mechanism to support literal fulfillment, symbolic readings became the most coherent option. However, the trajectory of technological development over the past century has fundamentally altered this equation. The progression is both rapid and cumulative. Radio introduced the possibility of simultaneous auditory communication across vast distances. Television added a visual dimension, allowing millions to witness events as they unfolded. Satellite technology expanded this reach globally, removing many of the geographic barriers that once limited broadcast network. The internet then revolutionized access, decentralizing content distribution and enabling near-instantaneous sharing of information across continents. Finally, the emergence of smartphones placed this entire infrastructure into the hands of individuals, transforming passive audiences into active participants within a global network. This technological arc represents more than majority innovation. It constitutes a structural shift in how reality is experienced collectively. Today, if a significant event occurs in a specific location, particularly a city of global interest such as Jerusalem, it can be captured, transmitted, and viewed by millions within minutes. Live streaming platforms allow real-time broadcasting without reliance on traditional media and muassasat. Social media amplifies visibility through algorithmic distribution, rapidly turning localized incidents into global phenomena. The mafhum of going viral encapsulates this dynamic. A single piece of content can reach a worldwide audience in a matter of hours, sometimes even minutes. Within this context, the once problematic statement of Revelation 11:9 begins to appear less symbolic and more technically plausible. The infrastructure required for global observation is no longer hypothetical, it is fully operational. Billions of devices are interconnected, capable of receiving live video feeds at any moment. Time zones, while still relevant, no longer prevent simultaneous awareness, as content can be accessed on demand and replayed instantly. Language barriers are mitigated through real-time translation tools, further expanding accessibility. In effect, the conditions that once rendered the prophecy implausible have been systematically removed. Beyond the mechanics of visibility, the prophecy also anticipates a coordinated global reaction. The text describes not only observation but celebration, people rejoicing over the deaths of the witnesses, even exchanging gifts. Historically, such synchronized behavior on a global scale would have been inconceivable. Cultural, political, and logistical differences would have prevented any unified response. Today, however, collective reactions are a defining feature of digital thaqafa. Social media platforms facilitate rapid emotional convergence, where users across different regions respond simultaneously to the same event. Trends emerge, hashtags circulate,
and narratives solidify in real time. Public sentiment can coalesce around a single moment, producing a sense of shared experience that transcends geographic boundaries. This capacity for synchronized reaction introduces a new dimension to the prophecy. It is not merely that people can see the event, they can also participate in a collective interpretation of it. The celebration described in Revelation can be understood, in modern terms, as a global wave of digital engagement, posts, comments, shares, and symbolic gestures that reinforce a common perspective. The exchange of gifts, while culturally specific in the ancient context, may parallel contemporary forms of social signaling where users express alignment through visible actions within a networked environment. Yet the most striking element of this prophecy lies not in the visibility or the reaction, but in the response to what follows. After 3.5 days, the text describes the two witnesses being resurrected, standing on their feet in full view of those who are watching. This is not a hidden event or a second-hand report. It is a direct, observable phenomenon. In a modern context, such an occurrence would likely be captured from multiple angles, analyzed frame by frame, and broadcast across every available platform. It would dominate global discourse, challenging existing frameworks of understanding and demanding explanation. And yet, according to the narrative, this undeniable event does not produce universal belief. Instead, it intensifies fear without necessarily leading to repentance or acceptance of truth. This outcome introduces a critical insight into the nature of human perception. The limitation is not in the availability of evidence, but in the interpretation of that evidence. Even in a world where information is abundant and access is immediate, belief is not guaranteed. Pre-existing assumptions, ideological commitments, and cognitive biases shape how events are understood. In this sense, the prophecy anticipates a paradox that is increasingly evident in contemporary society: the coexistence of unprecedented visibility with persistent disagreement. Thus, the second prophecy extends the argument established in the first. It demonstrates that the barriers to literal fulfillment are not only physical, but also technological, and that these barriers are rapidly dissolving. The global stage described in Revelation is no longer an abstract concept, it is a functional reality. At the same time, the prophecy warns that visibility alone does not resolve the deeper issue of recognition. The world may see, but it does not necessarily understand. If the first prophecy confronts us with a changing physical landscape, and the second with a transformed global visibility, the third prophecy introduces something far more unsettling: an encounter with a form of force that challenges the boundary between the natural and the unnatural, the material and the possibly transcendent. In Revelation 9, the narrative shifts from rivers and witnesses to an event described with imagery so intense and unfamiliar that it has resisted stable interpretation for centuries: the release of what is often called the locust army. The primary textual foundation for this prophecy is found in Revelation 9, where the sounding of the fifth trumpet initiates a sequence of events beginning with a star falling from heaven and being given the key to the bottomless pit. When this abyss is opened, smoke rises like that of a great furnace, darkening the sun and the air. Out of this smoke emerge creatures described as locusts, yet immediately distinguished from any natural counterpart. These are not agricultural pests consuming vegetation. They are agents with a specific directive. They are commanded not to harm grass, trees, or any green plant, but only those people who do not bear a particular mark. This inversion of natural behavior signals that we are no longer within the realm of ordinary ecology. To fully grasp the depth of this imagery, it is necessary to consider its Old Testament parallel in Joel 1-2. There, the prophet describes a locust invasion of catastrophic scale, an event so overwhelming that it devastates the land, darkens the sky, and advances with what appears to be organized precision. Joel's language is deliberately heightened. The locusts are likened to a nation, powerful and without number.
with teeth like lions and the ability to scale walls, enter houses, and move in coordinated formation. Crucially, Joel frames this not merely as a natural disaster, but as the day of the Lord, a moment of divine intervention that transcends ordinary experience. When this description is read alongside Revelation 9, the continuity becomes evident. Two texts, separated by centuries, depict a force that resembles a locust swarm, yet behaves with intentionality and structure far beyond that of insects. One of the most striking features of the Revelation account is the nature of the suffering inflicted. Unlike many apocalyptic scenarios that emphasize destruction and death, this passage specifies that the locusts are not permitted to kill. Instead, they are authorized to torment for a fixed period, 5 months. The pain they cause is described as comparable to the sting of a scorpion, but intensified to a degree that drives those afflicted to seek death as an escape, only to find it unavailable. This detail introduces a unique dimension: suffering without termination. It is not annihilation, but sustained agony. From a narrative standpoint, this amplifies the psychological impact. Death, often perceived as an end, is withheld, leaving only the istimrar of pain. Interpreting these descriptions has historically led to two primary approaches, each attempting to reconcile the vivid imagery with known categories of reality. The first is a supernatural interpretation. Within this framework, the locusts are understood as demonic entities, beings originating from the bottomless pit, led by a figure identified as a destroyer. Their release is not accidental, but governed by a specific timeline and authority. This reading takes the text at face value within its own cosmology, where spiritual beings can interact directly with the physical world. The unusual characteristics, human-like faces, iron-like breastplates, the sound of wings resembling chariots, are seen as attempts by the author to describe entities that do not correspond to any familiar biological form. The second approach is technological. Here, the emphasis shifts from ontology to analogy. The argument suggests that the descriptions in Revelation may correspond not to literal creatures, but to advanced human-made systems that did not exist at the time of writing. Consider the elements described: armored bodies, breastplates of iron, coordinated movement, a loud mechanical sound, like many chariots rushing into battle, and a stinging mechanism capable of delivering targeted, non-lethal pain. When viewed through a modern lens, these features bear a resemblance to certain categories of military technology, particularly unmanned aerial systems. In recent years, the development of drone swarm technology has introduced capabilities that align, at least superficially, with these descriptions. Swarm systems consist of multiple autonomous units operating in coordination, capable of navigating complex environments, identifying targets, and executing tasks without direct human control. Advances in artificial intelligence enable these systems to adapt in real time, making collective decisions based on sensor data. Additionally, research into non-lethal weapons, including directed energy systems and chemical agents designed to incapacitate rather than kill, has expanded the range of possible effects such technologies can produce. While no current system fully matches the scale or specificity described in Revelation, the alitijah of development suggests that increasingly sophisticated and autonomous adawat are becoming feasible. This technological reading does not necessarily negate the supernatural interpretation. Rather, it introduces the possibility of convergence. The text itself does not explicitly categorize the locusts as either purely spiritual or purely mechanical. It presents them as entities emerging from a non-human domain, yet interacting with the human world in a tangible way. For a first-century observer lacking the vocabulary of modern engineering, the distinction between advanced technology and unfamiliar life forms would be difficult to articulate. Descriptive language would naturally draw from known analogies, animals, armor, chariots, to convey something fundamentally new. This raises a critical question. Are these two interpretations mutually exclusive, or could they represent different layers of the same phenomenon? One could hypothesize a scenario in which advanced technological systems are influenced, directed, or even inhabited by non-human intelligences, though such a proposition moves beyond empirical verification into the realm of speculation. Alternatively, the imagery may function as a symbolic compression, capturing the hope associated with encountering a force that is both intelligent and uncontrollable, regardless of its precise nature. What remains consistent across both readings is the emphasis on limitation and selectivity. The locusts are constrained. They operate within defined parameters, targeting specific individuals and acting for a predetermined duration. This suggests a level of control that contrasts with the apparent chaos of their daysphere. Whether understood as divine permission within a supernatural framework or as programmed constraints within a technological one, the result is the same: a force that is powerful, precise, and temporally bounded. In conclusion, the third prophecy extends the trajectory established in the previous sections by introducing a form of agency that challenges conventional categories. It compels us to consider not only what is possible within current technological paradigms, but also how ancient texts encode experiences that may not fit neatly into modern classifications. Whether the locust army is interpreted as a literal release of supernatural entities, an anticipatory description of advanced weaponry, or a synthesis of both, the underlying implication is clear. The gap between what was once unimaginable and what is now conceivable continues to narrow. If the third prophecy destabilizes our assumptions about the nature of force, blurring the line between the technological and the potentially supernatural, the fourth and final prophecy moves even deeper into the domain of cognition itself. Here, the central issue is no longer what happens in the external world, but how that world is interpreted. The focus shifts from events to perception, from phenomena to belief. In this sense, the final prophecy represents not merely a culmination, but an escalation. The ultimate battleground is the human mind. The biblical foundation for this concept is distributed across multiple texts, each contributing a distinct layer to the overall framework. In 2 Thessalonians 2, the Apostle Paul introduces the idea of a strong delusion, describing a condition in which individuals are not simply deceived, but are actively given over to falsehood. This is not portrayed as an arbitrary act. It follows a prior decision. The text specifies that this delusion comes upon those who refuse to love the truth. In other words, the deception is not imposed on neutral observers. It is the natija of an earlier rejection. This principle is echoed in Isaiah 66, where God is described as choosing delusions for those who have already chosen their own ways. Daniel 8 adds another dimension, describing a figure who achieves success through deception, not through overt ulkua, but through subtlety and persuasion. Finally, Revelation 13 synthesizes these themes into a global system, centered around a figure often referred to as the Beast, who exercises authority not only through signs and wonders, but through the establishment of an economic structure that governs participation in society. At the core of this prophecy lies the concept of the strong delusion. It is essential to distinguish this from ordinary deception. In everyday terms, deception implies the presence of misleading information that can, in principle, be corrected by better evidence or clearer reasoning. A strong delusion, as described in the text, operates differently. It is not merely the acceptance of false information, it is the internalization of that falsehood as truth. The individual does not experience doubt, confusion, or hesitation. On the contrary, the belief feels coherent, justified, and even self-evident. This is what makes it strong, not its intensity alone, but its resistance to correction. The mechanism described suggests a two-stage process. First, there is a voluntary alignment with what is false, a choice, whether conscious or gradual, to reject what is true. Second, there is a reinforcement of that choice, a kind of beat that solidifies the false belief to the point where alternative interpretations are no longer considered viable. In modern cognitive terms, this resembles a feedback loop in which confirmation bias, social reinforcement, and informational filtering converge to produce a closed epistemic system. Once established, such a system is remarkably difficult to disrupt because any contradictory evidence is either dismissed or reinterpreted to fit the existing framework. This internal dynamic is then externalized through the economic system described in Revelation 13. The text introduces a condition in which participation in commerce, buying and selling, is contingent upon receiving a specific mark. Without this mark, individuals are effectively excluded from the economic life of society. Historically, this concept has been interpreted in various ways, often symbolically. However, when considered alongside contemporary developments, the structure described begins to resemble certain emerging models of financial control. One of the most relevant modern parallels is the development of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Unlike traditional cash, which exists physically and can be exchanged anonymously, digital currencies operate within centralized ledgers. Every transaction is recorded, traceable, and, in principle, subject to regulation or restriction by the issuing authority. This creates a mustawa of oversight that was previously unattainable. Transactions can be monitored in real time, patterns can be analyzed algorithmically, and access can be granted or revoked based on predefined criteria. In isolation, such systems are often justified on the basis of efficiency, security, and transparency. They can reduce fraud, streamline payments, and enhance financial inclusion. However, the same infrastructure also introduces the possibility of behavioral control. If access to economic resources is mediated through a centralized system, then that system becomes a point of leverage. Conditions can be attached to participation. Compliance can be incentivized, and deviation can be penalized, not necessarily through overt coercion, but through restriction of access. When this capability is integrated with broader data ecosystems, social media activity, geolocation tracking, consumption patterns, the result is a shabaka of interdependent signals that can be used to construct detailed behavioral profiles. Decisions about access are no longer based solely on financial criteria, but can incorporate a wide range of variables. In such a context, the distinction between economic participation and social conformity becomes increasingly blurred. This brings us to the most critical aspect of the prophecy: the subjective experience of those within the system. The text does not describe individuals accepting the mark under obvious duress or recognizing it as inherently malevolent. Instead, the implication is that they perceive it as necessary, reasonable, even beneficial. This is where the concept of the strong delusion intersects with the economic structure. The system does not rely solely on external enforcement. It is sustained by internal conviction. People comply not because they are forced in a visible sense, but because they believe compliance is the correct choice. From an analytical perspective, this represents a convergence of cognitive and structural dynamics. The delusion shapes perception, influencing how information is interpreted. The system reinforces behavior, aligning incentives with that perception. Together, they create a stable configuration in which dissent becomes both cognitively unlikely and practically costly. The most effective form of control, in this model, is not the suppression of thought, but its redirection. This is why the prophecy identifies belief itself as the central vulnerability. The greatest danger is not merely that people are misled, but that they are confident in their misinterpretation. When individuals are convinced that their perspective is accurate, they are less likely to question it, less open to alternative views, and more resistant to correction. This condition can persist even in the presence of contradictory evidence, as seen in the second prophecy, where observable events do not produce consensus. In this light, the fourth prophecy serves as a synthesis of the previous three.
The changing environment, the drying river, the global visibility, the two witnesses, and the emergence of unfamiliar forces, the locust army, all culminate in a scenario where information is abundant, events are observable, and yet understanding remains fragmented. The final layer is not about what happens, but about what is believed to be happening. Thus, the progression reaches its logical endpoint. The barriers to physical fulfillment have diminished. The infrastructure for global awareness is fully established. The capacity for complex, coordinated systems, whether technological or otherwise, continues to expand. And at the center of it all is the human mind, tasked with interpreting a reality that is increasingly dense, interconnected, and difficult to navigate. The prophecy does not merely predict events, it anticipates the conditions under which those events will be misunderstood. As the trajectory of these prophecies unfolds, from environmental shifts to global visibility, from hybrid forces to systemic deception, it converges toward a final and decisive threshold, a crisis not of events, but of understanding. This is the point at which the external world and the internal mind intersect, producing a condition that can be described as a crisis of perception. It is not merely that reality becomes more complex, it is that the tools used to interpret reality begin to fail. The result is a breakdown in the ability to distinguish between what is true and what only appears to be true. This is the essence of the climactic moment. Deception no longer presents itself as something suspicious or questionable. It feels coherent. It feels justified. It feels, perhaps most dangerously, like clarity. The phrase "deception feels like truth" captures this inversion precisely. In earlier stages, falsehood could often be identified through contradiction or inconsistency. In this final stage, those signals are no longer reliable. The false integrates seamlessly with the plausible, and the plausible is reinforced through repetition, consensus, and algorithmic amplification. What emerges is not confusion, but a false certainty, a state in which individuals are confident in conclusions that are fundamentally misaligned with reality. This shift is deeply connected to the mechanisms already outlined in the previous sections. The global infrastructure of communication ensures that information is no longer scarce. On the contrary, it is overwhelming in volume and velocity. Every event can be recorded, transmitted, and analyzed from multiple perspectives. Yet this abundance does not produce clarity. Instead, it creates a competitive environment of narratives where different interpretations coexist and compete for dominance. Algorithms prioritize engagement, not accuracy, amplifying content that resonates emotionally or ideologically rather than content that is verifiably true. In such an environment, perception is continuously shaped, filtered, and reinforced. This is why the prophecy identifies the most powerful weapon not as physical force, but as information and cognition. Traditional warfare operates through destruction. Territory is seized, infrastructure is damaged, populations are displaced. But in a cognitively driven conflict, the objective is different. It is not to destroy the opponent, but to redefine their understanding. If perception can be controlled, behavior follows naturally. There is no need for overt coercion when individuals willingly align with the narrative they believe to be correct. This form of influence operates on multiple levels. At the individual level, it engages cognitive biases, confirmation bias, selective exposure, and the tendency to trust familiar sources. At the social level, it leverages group dynamics, peer validation, social identity, and the fear of exclusion. At the systemic level, it is embedded in the architecture of digital platforms, recommendation systems, feedback loops, and data-driven personalization. Together, these layers create a self-reinforcing ecosystem in which certain interpretations are continuously strengthened while others are marginalized or dismissed. The result is a landscape in which truth is no longer evaluated solely on evidence, but on alignment with existing beliefs, with social groups, with perceived authority. In such a context, even direct observation, as described in the second prophecy, does not guarantee accurate interpretation. People may witness the same event and arrive at radically different conclusions, each convinced of their correctness. This is the full realization of the strong delusion, not ignorance, but misdirected certainty. Yet it is precisely at this point of maximum complexity and potential disorientation that the final section introduces a different perspective. The narrative does not conclude with collapse, but with a reframing. The purpose of these prophecies, within their original context, is not to induce fear, but to provide orientation. They are not presented as unpredictable catastrophes, but as elements within a larger, coherent framework. From this vantage point, the unfolding of events, no matter how destabilizing, does not indicate a loss of control, but the execution of a predetermined structure. This leads directly into the concluding message. The emphasis shifts from anxiety to assurance. The al-ahdath described throughout are not random disruptions. They are integrated into a broader narrative in which ultimate authority remains intact. This is where the reference to Romans 8:38 becomes central. The passage asserts that neither death nor life, neither present circumstances nor future developments, nor any form of power can separate individuals from the love of God. Within the context of the preceding analysis, this statement functions as a counterbalance. It addresses the very conditions that generate fear, uncertainty, al-quwa, transformation, and repositions them within a framework of continuity and commitment. From an interpretive standpoint, this conclusion redefines the nature of the Book of Revelation itself. Rather than being read solely as a sequence of catastrophic events, it can be understood as a structured narrative of resolution. The imagery of conflict, judgment, and upheaval is not an end in itself, but part of a process leading toward restoration. In this sense, the text operates less as a horror scenario and more as a rescue mission, a depiction of intervention within a system that has reached a critical point. This distinction is significant because it alters the response of the observer. If the narrative is perceived only as a forecast of disaster, the natural reaction is fear or avoidance. If, however, it is understood as a controlled sequence leading to a defined outcome, the response shifts toward interpretation and alignment. The focus moves from attempting to predict every detail to understanding the overarching structure and its implications. In practical terms, this means that the central question is not simply what will happen, but how should one interpret and respond to what happens? The earlier sections have demonstrated that external conditions, technological, environmental, systemic, are evolving rapidly. The final sections emphasize that internal orientation, how one processes information, how one evaluates claims, how one maintains coherence in the face of competing narratives, is equally critical. This brings the entire discussion full circle. The initial paradox, that generations have predicted the end and been wrong, led to a re-evaluation based on new conditions. Those conditions were then explored through specific examples: a changing river, a global stage, an unfamiliar force, a comprehensive system. Each step reduced the gap between ancient description and modern possibility. The final step addresses the remaining variable: the human capacity to interpret what is unfolding. If there is a unifying thread across all sections, it is this: the challenge is not only external, but cognitive. The environment may change, technology may advance, systems may evolve, but the decisive factor remains the ability to discern, to evaluate, and to remain anchored amid complexity. If this analysis has helped you see these connections with greater clarity, consider following the channel for further explorations of related themes. Future discussions will continue to examine how ancient frameworks intersect with modern developments, not through speculation, but through structured analysis. Subscribing ensures you do not miss upcoming content that builds on this foundation, expanding both the scope and the depth of the conversation.